Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight. My name is Terry Stewart, and I'm the president of the Wagner Society of Northern California, who's sponsoring this event this evening. I just want to let you know if you need to get up and take a break, we're filming. So if you need to, on this side, go out that door. On this side, go out that door. If you would, please. It's that way you're not walking in front. Everyone? Without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's guest, and we're really delighted to have her with us. I'm going to do a couple quotes from some people whose judgment I value greatly. Whenever I work with a director, I tend to come in with a fully formed idea about a character or piece itself. As an actress, I wanted to challenge, to rethink my ideas and be offered new perspectives to hone in on and better my character arc. Francesca does that by listening attentively and creating the most productive collaboration possible. She always considers the artists in front of her and pushes them to do more, to become more, and to risk more. Francesca always brings out the best in who we are and what we can be. And this is from my dear friend, Christine Gerthen. And another one, a little more close to home. The community is so lucky to have such an innovator and an important leader in the arts at the helm. And that came from our beloved Leah Cochetto. Francesca Zambello has been part of the San Francisco opera family for a very long time. In her early career, she worked with the iconic director Jean-Pierre Brunel, and it would take a very long time to recount Zambello's numerous accomplishments. But I will name my own personal favorite, her San Francisco opera, American Ring, which lives in my heart to this day. Completed in 2011, it spanned the history from the California Gold Rush to the current world of corporate behemoths. Heavy on the behemoths. We could spend a long time recounting her theatrical successes, but right now, I would much rather hear her thoughts about Richard Wagner and what it takes to bring these monumental theater works to the stage. So please join me in welcoming Francesca Zambello.
And so I'm thrilled to share a little bit about Tannhäuser with you. And I know I have tough competition because Ina Garden is speaking at the Opera House right now. And I almost ducked in there. It's funny, I just came from the Kennedy Center where I serve as the artistic director, and she spoke there last week. So I guess she's doing some kind of book tour right now about her biography. Anyway, the genesis for this talk was really, I reached out to Terry because I said I'm going to be in San Francisco to do Carmen, and I'm doing a new production of Tannhäuser this spring at the Houston Grand Opera. And that production is going to a number of other companies, not here, but you never know. But I thought that it might be fun to share some things about it visually and to talk about Tannhäuser and to share with you some of our plans and ideas about how to approach it and maybe entice you all to take a trip to Houston. You know, it's plenty of flights every day. I don't need to go into that. So, and I don't know, I should have looked up when Tannhäuser was last done here. It's been a long time. I'm sure somebody in here that we love, La Bohème, Tosca, Orfeo, and to me, the most exciting opera that has an artist at the center is Tannhäuser. Tannhäuser, the protagonist, is a poet and a musician, and he's a consummate artist. And I think the reason that we feel these operas so much, of course the story and the music, but I do believe that every person has some kind of artistic spirit. Everyone has some desire within them to create in some way or another. And so I think that that is what really draws us to these pieces. So in this work, often, this and others, often, the artist protagonist is set against a backdrop of a very broken world, and that we believe that art can hopefully change that world. And I certainly think that Wagner thought that. But so I want to talk specifically about this piece and how, and I'm going to show you lots of images and just tell you a little bit how it evolves. When you work with designers, that's really the departure point for an opera. And thank you for those great quotes from Christine and Leah. But the part where you work with the artists actually comes very late in the process for a director. For a director, your work begins usually 2 years in advance, if not more. Because you start to work with the designers on what is the piece going to look like, how are we going to interpret it, and so it's really, in a way, that work, honestly, is more than 50% of the job, because it's when you get together with the artist that's very often an accelerating part of the process. That's usually only 6 weeks up until the premiere. But the design process, the cooking process, that's an homage to Ina right now, the marinating process really takes about 2 years. And so in this case, the designers who I chose to work with on this, they're all actually familiar to you, but for different kinds of pieces here, and I thought I'll just introduce them in terms of their work here. So Peter Davison is the set designer, and here he designed Courtney and Bess, Showboat, and 2 Women. Constance Kaufman is the costume designer. She recently designed Anthony and Cleopatra here, and your Mozart trilogy. And then Katie Tucker is the projection designer, and she did the ring roofing, and you will recall that projections were a very integral part of that ring storytelling. So when we start a design process, we generally all sit down together or Zoom together now, but honestly, it's of course better to do it in person. And so we start by doing a lot of research, a lot of going back and reading everything about the piece, looking at everything about art that surrounds the world, everything about politics. And you have to begin really, 1845, the year of the premiere for Wagner. What was going on then? I'm glad we're premiering this in Houston because that was the founding of the state of Texas, was 1845. And so for us as designer and director, it's really a collective work. The best designs, in a way, you as a director help create, and the designers in turn help you direct a piece. Because you have to figure out not all about history and story, but the characters. The characters are your guide and your leader to interpret a piece. The score and the words are your Bible. You have to start with that. And so you, of course, spend a lot of time on music, but it's really the key. Understanding characters is how I, as a director, believe that one has to start out. Where are the characters going to live? What is the world that they're going to inhabit? And I think, it's not like you wake up and say, oh, let's set this, in 1945, blah, blah, blah. You have to think, what's going to be the best place for the springboard for these characters? And so for us, what seemed important was that Tannhäuser lives in a world that is strict and repressive and holds him down as an artist. And so, of course, you could set that in a contemporary setting easily. There's no question that the artist is often the outsider. But instead, we chose to look at something more evocative of the 19th century that would suggest a kind of closed society, which we should soon see. And it was also, what is an important part of repression? Well, in Tannhäuser, of course, I think it's the most religious of Wagner's works. It's the most Christian of his works. And I think that religion can unite people. Of course, it can divide people. We're not going to talk about politics tonight. But religion can hold people down. And I think in the case of Tannhäuser, his community, and whatever that religion is, that's all those people, in a way, I think that that is what holds him down. And so I've often thought that Tannhäuser is really a parallel to Wagner himself. That the dilemmas that Wagner struggled to articulate, his alternative worldview through his art as a poet and a musician, I think come out the most in this piece. This feels like, to me, the most personal of Wagner's operas, where he's really expressing himself as Tannhäuser. And no, Tannhäuser is not going to look like Richard Wagner. And so we chose to interpret this story as one that we will see how, in a way, organized religion or community can often be in conflict with free speech and a free spirit. So, starting with this piece, one of the big decisions you have to make is, are we going to do the Dresden version, or are we going to do the Paris version? So we are doing the Dresden version in Houston. I don't want to say all that about ballet. I really just don't. I want to get into the story. I mean, it's probably heresy to say that, but I just think that the version where we slide right into Venusberg is a lot better. So clearly, the world of Tannhäuser, the opposite of that world, is Venusberg. And Venusberg is outside of everything that is who he is. And it is there that, of course, he needs to go to find his dark side, to find the thing that helps him make poetry, make the singing, and make the music, initially. So, as the opera opens, we chose to look to a really sublime natural world. We were very much inspired by the romantic painters of the late 19th century. Of course, the German school, but also we were thinking somewhat like the Hudson River School as well. So the opera begins with a fairly long prelude. And so through this prelude, what we do is that we journey with Tannhäuser from his community, from his religious community, to a world that I think is much more urban, because his world is very rural. And so we sort of suggest the Wartburg Castle, you can see there, these are projections. And we journey slowly to an urban setting, because I think that his world is rural, and his world is nature. But somehow this urban world, and of course in this period, I think greatly inspires him. His community, I think of as being something that could be Amish or Quaker or Hutterite. And the way all of those communities work is when people come of a certain age, they go out to experience life outside of their community. And in his case, I think that he journeys to something that might be like New York or another big city at the turn of the last century, where we think about a world that is maybe a lot more decadent, interesting, perhaps intellectual, a salon kind of a world. And so we have landed the piece for Venusberg in something that is really a kind of salon that could be something that Edith Wharton is dominating, something that is completely different than his romantic, natural world, but one that is very urban. And of course, at this time, many cities, New York, Paris, all have this sort of world of salon where artists gather, where people challenge the norms, where people experience very different things, and where it's populated by artists. And for me, I thought I could believe that you would come here and that Venus would be not just carnal love. I mean, it's really, enough of Venus slinking around in a dress, Part of it, I think, is that she's freeing that part of him to express himself. And so we spend the first part of the first act in this world very much that would feel like a salon. She's a salonista, really, Venus. So that she, inspired by key to providing places where intellectual activity happens. So this is some of the sort of research that we did into it. Various women, these are costumes, references for costumes. And here are some of the costume sketches. You can see there a dancer, somebody asked me that. Yes, we do have some ballet, but we do not have long ballet. There's some ballet. And then you can see Venus there and other dancers. So there's definitely that world that's completely free, and as you will see, very different in his society. This scene is also populated by other people who are in the salon. So trying to make them each very individual, people who are completely different than him and exciting and enticing to him. So these are all working costume sketches. The men in this world, in Venusberg, of course, you can think of every possible poet or writer in this period, musician, and so this is various references from France and from New York. And then Tannhäuser himself manages, as you will see, to throw off his sort of conventional clothes, and he's down there at the bottom on the left, and dresses something that is very much evocative of that time and place. Again, very different than the world that he is in. But of course, as we know, after he sings his big hit in that scene, he is slowly drawn back to his world. So we have a natural world creeping back into him, into his consciousness, as he begins to feel guilty, right? He feels guilty he left his world behind. And so we slowly transform back into nature, and back, leaving the city, leaving the urban world, and back into his rural setting, where we slowly journey back to the barkboard, and where he is, of course, going to hear the sounds of the young shepherd. And I imagine, so this is a set model. I'm sure you've all seen these a lot. So this is a set without projections on it. And so it's almost like, I feel like it's almost like, he got off the Greyhound bus back in his community, and he's back in his world when he encounters all of the men who are in his community who've been like, what's going on? You're completely different. It's also here that we see all of these men, of course, are hunting, which is a great analogy to, they're hunting animals for food, whereas he just came from New York, where he was hunting something for his soul and his spirit. Let's see, and then, there we go. So you can see here projections start to transform this world. And so in this scene, you may recall, is the first passage of the Pilgrims, where we really have the intense reminder of religion. And so here, we really harken back to something medieval. We wanted to go back to something that was really at the root of the Pilgrims who were passing through the forest. So this is costume research. This is the kind of, you do a lot of research on these pieces. And then it evolves into set drawings. So you can see here what they all look like. And of course, Tannhäuser later, of course, he becomes a pilgrim. And so the men all say, hey, we got this song contest going tonight. You better show up, have you written something? And so, of course, the act ends. Of course, these are some of the men who he encounters here. These are some of the men of this community of the barber, I think. Again, this is very much inspired by Amish, who write these very kind of closed communities that exist, that I think are in a way holding him down. This is all research, actually, from, a lot of this is from central New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. And so that it evolves to, you can see here, these are what some of the men look like when they're out hunting in their coats, Walter, Heinrich, and the Landgraf. And so, of course, then he is drawn back into this world. And so when we go to the second act, the Wartburg Pala, where the song contest takes place, this is the setting, this is the basic set. And so this was really inspired by many community meeting halls, Quaker meeting halls, where people would gather to sing and often to dance as well. And it's here, of course, Elisabeth sings, and I feel like I'm not going to go through the plot in Tannhäuser. Everybody in this room knows it. It's not like I'm at the Wagner 101 so in this community room, it has to serve a lot of functions. It's of course, this is where the song contest takes place, but it's also where, of course, Venus intervenes in his mind, where each of the men compete, and where eventually, of course, all of his fellow community members turn against him when he begins to express himself, again, with this incredibly passionate singing. I will share with you sort of a little bit of what you think about as a director for these kinds of scenes. You really have to worry in scenes like Act 2 of Tannhäuser. You know that you're going to have 80 choristers on stage. Where am I going to put them? Number one. Number two, you have to make sure that they are in a place where they can sing well and where it's going to be, you know, a huge sound. And so that's why there are these big walls. You know, walls are very good on stage for acoustical purposes, especially in pieces, you know, Verdi and Wagner, things with big orchestra. So in this case, you'll see there are these big walls, and conveniently, these many benches are going to be seating a lot of choristers who will, you know, sing a lot in the second act. And then the song competition happens, you know, in this space. And this whole set actually is on a rake. Another sort of insider secret is a rake, even though singers complain about standing on rakes, you know, on stages like this, a rake is very useful for sound. It projects sound out. And so I always say when they complain, I say, well, you know, you sound a lot better standing on a rake than if you're on a flat floor. And of course, with a big chorus, any big chorus opera, you want to either have levels that they can stand on, staircases, platforms, something, or a rake so that you can see them, so that you're not just looking at a sea of heads, you know, that's insider, you know, trading information. Anyway, so this set, of course, has to transform a lot, and so through that, the use of projections will help with that. So this is, before we get to this is what the women look like in this community. Again, inspired very much by these religious communities that are, again, holding down these kinds of art, and artists like Tannhäuser. Interestingly, many of these communities, they don't all dress in black and white, which is good, because like enough of black and white costumes. They use a lot of color, especially, interestingly, the Hutterites, of which a lot of this is inspired by. So this is all the women's chorus. And of course, when you have a lot of women's chorus, you want to give people a little bit of an individual character. So everybody's not wearing the same color, but different colors with, you know, different sort of similar but different cuts. You know, and also, you know, the younger girls who announce each of the singers, you can see there on the bottom line. And Elisabeth is there in the middle. Again, this is some of the inspiration for this, where this is drawn from. The way that you can just see how people hold themselves. Again, these are kinds of things that you think about as a director. You know, people are very formal, their hands are in the same place, so that when you break rank in these kinds of things, when they begin to go crazy with Tannhäuser, the world is breaking down because of him. These are all the different men, the maestros, the singers, the people who are competing against Tannhäuser. And of course, Tannhäuser, you know, he sings the best tune, although nobody likes it, but the audience and Wolfram. And so, again, a very conservative, tight group of men. These are all the chorus men, and we differentiate between younger and elders by using color as a way to suggest rank in this community. And then you can see here we start to project on the walls as he begins to sing about his vision of love. And then, of course, there comes a moment where the urban world comes back, which is when Venus appears. The writing on the wall, which we saw back in the first act. And then we go to the last act, which, of course, after he's thrown out of his community and has to go to Rome. And so the idea here is that the whole community hall has been destroyed. It's winter. The world is in a way, of course, I think broken apart by this point. The sort of diametrically opposed sentiments of this carnal love, real art versus sort of this superficial art. You know, I think, tear down the world. And so using the idea of the room, you can see here that we have sort of the remnants of the building. And this is where, of course, we have all those very, very beautiful scenes. Wolfram's singing the famous aria, Elisabeth, when she comes, she's waiting and waiting for him because he's in Rome. It's a long trip to Rome, a long walk. And then, of course, the famous tenor's monologue, the Romance Salem, the tale of Rome, where he talks about meeting with the Pope. And then his epic journey, he believes, is cursed, but actually, of course, in the end, I think it is salvation. And so this space we transform again through projections. And then in the final moment when we believe, of course, that he has failed, actually nature returns and the tree blossoms, a miracle happens, which of course, again, you know, that's a whole other discussion as the Christian aspects of this piece, but that's another lecture. And so, of course, the miracle unfolds at that point when I believe Tannhäuser dies at that point and is joined with Elisabeth. And of course, they become a galaxy of stars together. These are all sort of different projection ideas I'm sharing with you. These are sort of northern lights, like their souls are ascending together, perhaps. And then, of course, I think in the order of the world is reborn by the end of the piece. I do think the end of the piece is incredibly positive and incredibly beautiful. We have all the pilgrims have returned, and I think that he has given us, Tannhäuser has given us, again, a new order, a new world. So these are all different ideas that we play with through this. There we go. So it looks something like all of that. So let me tell you a little bit more about the rehearsal process and the cast. So we have a fantastic cast in Houston. Interestingly, everyone is debuting in their roles. So everyone has never done this. It's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, because everybody can discover these roles together and unfold themselves in them. Russell Thomas, who I know is no stranger to audiences here, I think he was Florestan a year ago here. He's debuting as Tannhäuser. The soprano Tamara Wilson is Elisabeth. I'm not sure she's sung here. Yes, no, maybe. She sang Isolde last summer, I know, in Santa Fe. And she is a wonderful Wagnerian. She's sung a number of the other Wagner roles, but not Elisabeth. And then the mezzo-soprano Sasha Cooke is Venus. She has been here a lot. A baritone Luke Sutliff is Wolfram, and the bass Alexandros Stavrakakis is the Landgraf. And then Erik Nielsen is the music director of the Bilbao Symphony Orchestra, makes his debut. So what happens when everybody is new to their roles? It's a little bit different. It takes more time, which is fine. And basically what I generally like to do, and I find that most artists like to do it, particularly Wagner. You know, Wagner in general takes a lot more time to rehearse because it's longer. It's just basically, it's longer. When you run a scene from La Bohème, it's maybe 18 minutes long. You know, Café Momo is 18 minutes. When you run a scene from Wagner, it's often 45 minutes or an hour. So you get in this different mindset about time. So with this group of people, what will happen is that I already start writing them now about ideas about the characters, and you know, I bring your own ideas, but also maybe think about these things as well. I send them reading lists, things that you might want to read or listen or look at or think about. And then in the beginning of the rehearsal process, we sit down at a table together after the conductor has gone through everything musically, and we go through all the text. Because of course Wagner's German, it's thick, it's difficult. Even for German speakers, native speakers, you really have to understand the meaning of each word, not just like a literal translation, but also really what is the deeper meaning, what is the spiritual meaning, what is the meaning about art, not just what's the story, but what is underneath all of it. And that usually takes 3 or 4 days where you just often sit around the table and go through the whole piece, word by word, note by note, so that you can figure out the characters and what are their relationships. You know, it's not so simple. And also, I noticed you, I think it's really important to let artists, they bring their interpretation or their viewpoint to it. And then I try and meld it together with each other and with what I might be thinking about, how we're going to interpret and tell this story. So now you have kind of an overview knowing that I'm thinking about this, about an artist who's outside of society, an artist who's left his community, an artist who goes to a different place to try to in a way, to try to free his spirit. And so for me, those are the things that I was, you're getting a big preview on this, okay? None of these people even know this yet. So this is kind of the starting place for all of this. So that generally what we're going to do is, I'll share all these designs and we'll talk about all this together. But it's really how one begins these processes for these rather long, epic, thoughtful operas. So that's a bit of an overview about it. First, I would love for all of you to get on an airplane and come to Houston this spring. And I know that Terry has all the information that I could do that. Houston, I'll just do a little plug for Houston for a second. In Recode, this opera is the opera Breaking the Waves by Mazzoli, so you can see two operas. Houston has a lot of nice hotels. I can't say that the restaurants are as good as here. I will be honest, they are very good, but it's really hard competition. But I will say that the museums there are phenomenal. The Houston Museum of Fine Arts is one of the best in this country. It has the biggest endowment. It's bigger than the Metropolitan Museum's endowment. It's a very wealthy museum with phenomenal collections. There's an amazing Holocaust museum. I feel like I'm a tour guide now. There's the Neal Museum. There's the Rothko Chapel. There's lots to do there. It's not like Houston Cape Town. And besides the previous general director, David Gockley came from there. So it's definitely a great place to consider visiting, and they have a lot of Wagner activities happening, a lot of discussions and seminars will be going on during that time. And they roll out Texas hospitality for you. So I hope all of you might consider signing up with Terry, or I have the information of the person that I'm going to let you send out, who will give you all a deal if you head down. So that's a bit of an overview about all that. I'm happy to answer questions about Tannhäuser or about other Wagner things or anything like that. Or Carmen, even? I don't know. Yes. Okay. 2007. That's when you last did Tannhäuser. Thank you. Okay. Yes, sir. It sounds, well, they're very similar in a way. Well, there is a song contest in both of these operas, you are correct. However, the winner of the song contest does not consider himself an artist. But the most important person in Meistersinger is really the person who fixes your souls and your soul, the shoemaker. And so I think they're similar, but I think this is a much more romantic opera. I think that Meistersinger is a very different kind of community than this one. But yes, they do have song contests in it, for sure. That is definitely, this is an hour shorter than Meistersinger. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Do you ever look at other productions, because they're all on video now?
Do I ever look at other productions?
Yeah, not necessarily copy, but just...
No, sure. I mean, now, of course, I think everybody looks at things to some degree, and part of it is you see things, they enter in your conscience, your subconscious in a very different way. And it used to be that you would only see something if you traveled there to see it. And so now, of course, I've seen a million different, images. I mean, there was a big scandal last week about Tannhäuser where the audience got so sick in Germany they had to call in medics and haul people out because it was apparently so visceral and so bloody, and I'm not quite sure how, but that's all I know. It happened in some theater in northern Germany. I can't remember which one. So we're not doing that. But yeah, I think we definitely, people all, you see, of course you see things. I can't say I sit down and watch another production always. In a funny way, I always think, it's like every opera this is brand new. It's a world premiere. We are doing the world premiere of Tannhäuser. Yay! And so I think, okay, how am I going to start out? What grabs me in a way? And in a way, it's like you have to erase everything about it that you know. I find that as I do more. Like the first time I directed Tannhäuser was 30 years ago. Like what I know now is 8,000 times more than I knew then, and also 8,000 times less. And so I generally try to just scrap everything away. That's my process.
That's why you're also getting things to it.
Well, I mean, I feel like I used to be a rebel and now I'm more conservative, honestly, or at least perceived that way. And I think, yes, I've seen a lot of messy things happen. And in the end, I'll tell you, if a singer can't sing a role, everything you do, no matter what, it's just not going to work. There are very few people who are really such great actors that they obliterate the thing that they're great, maybe not good singers. You really need these pieces. If somebody can't sing it, just don't do it. Just forget it, don't do it. Yes, 2007, and then gentleman, yes. Ma'am.
I was wondering how you select and how you use understudies for your singers.
How do you select and how do you use understudies for your singers? Well, in most opera houses, they select the understudies. As the director, you don't select them. As a director, you are involved often in the casting process with an opera company. But the understudies, nowadays they tend to generally be, not for an opera like this, but for Carmen, for example. They mostly are members of the Young Artist Program. In this case, they're Adler Fellows. For Tannhäuser or any of these big Wagner pieces, you have to have covers. You have to have covers and they understood and they have to come from somewhere else. And to be honest, it's a limited number of people in the world who sing these things. It's a limited number, I'll tell you the truth. So Saturday night, 2 nights ago, in DC, we did a huge Wagner event. It was called, I called it Gods and Mortals, and we did selections from 10 operas. And the singers were Christine Gerke, Brandon Jovanovich, Solomon Howard, Derek Wellman, who's a big, in the Berlin Ensemble. And Brandon called me in the afternoon, and we were doing like Siegfried and Ziegler, and he was like, I don't know if I feel that great. And so I was like, oh my God, I have no cover. You were what I would do. So I said, okay, let's cut the Price song from Meistersinger. And he said, okay, then I think I can get through it. So you generally want to have covers in the house. Otherwise, you're frantically phoning. That's just part of it. But truthfully, there just aren't, when you do Wagner, there aren't a lot of people who sing these parts. They're just not, they don't go on trees. And also, they're not, if you're not in, let's say, if you're in Berlin, there might be somebody in Hamburg. But if you're in Houston, you can damn be sure there's nobody like in Dallas who sings the okay. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, so from the picture you showed us, you seem to make a fair bit of use of projection for this production.
Yes, I think it's basic settings with projections on top of it.
You produced a lot of work before this was technically physical, and now it is. Can you reflect a little bit on how that has changed your job, and whether there is anything special about using projection when it comes to the Wagner?
Sure, thank you. So the question is really about using projections and then what was it like before. Projections are really something of the 21st century. Of course, we sort of used them for some things before, but they become an integral part of design very often. I don't always like using them, to be honest. I still love a good set but sometimes projections help in terms of, opera is not a realistic art form. It's a very expressionistic art form, particularly Wagner operas. And so I find projections help us flow between a realistic scene and something that's more subliminal or subconscious. And that's why I like using do them particularly in these operas. I don't like using them in La Bohème. I don't use them in Carmen. So I think you have to find the right way to use them, I think, and that goes with the right material. And I also think something's very important about projections. You cannot, I believe, make something more powerful in the image than the person who's on stage. You don't want to upstage the performer. You want to support the performer. You want to give them something that helps what they're singing, doing, saying. And so I believe they really have to be a supporting character in projections, not a leading character. I'm sure you've seen productions where you came out and you were humming the scenery. And I don't think that's good. I think that opera is a living art form. I mean, I prefer it live to seeing it on video, but and I think that the people have to be big enough to carry the story. So I'm like an advocate of projections to a degree, and I think they're here with us. And now I think we're grappling a lot with LED projections. LED projections are much stronger than what you just saw. You know what an LED screen looks like? They're on every, you drive on the highway, there's one every 5 feet. And so when you have an LED screen on stage, it is much more powerful. It's like you can't not look at your phone sometimes. It's the same thing. It's the same technology. And so that's why I'm very cautious right now about how we bring that into harmony with what is essentially a 19th century art form. As much as we do contemporary music, it's still based on something. There's an orchestra, there's singers, there's a stage, and so it's finding the balance. It's all about balance. Yes, sir.
Do you receive some instructions from the opera company or have some negotiation about the character, the style of the production? For example, the opera house may have a traditional production in the past or a metaphysical production, not something different.
Sure. So the question is, do you receive instruction from the opera house about how to approach it? Sometimes, truthfully, people say, please don't do a modern production. Or please, can you do something not too off the wall? Or please do something more conventional. And they always say, I'm not making you do that, I just would appreciate it if you would think in that direction. And I think, again, it's like, I of course, now I run 2 opera companies for 14 years, so I'm very concerned about the audience. I'm more concerned about the audience than I was when I was just a director, because I want you to come back and I want you to give money. It's just as simple as that. Okay. And so I always tell people sometimes when they show up with some, like as a producer, as a general director, somebody shows up with some cockamamie design. I'm like, we are a service organization. I do not want to send people running up the aisles. Or somebody shows up, I commission a lot of new works, and I'm like, this is like pots and pans music. We're not doing this. We are here, I hope to keep the audience coming back. So yes, some people suggest something or urge you in a direction. But again, like when it's your own company, I even think more about it in a way. I worry more about subscribers. It's fine. Again, it's about balance. But I will say, people say things more to you in America than they do in other countries. In Europe, they have had more money, but now they're having the same problems that we've had. So now I'm like, welcome to the fold. So yes. And I think, is it bad, like when you listen to the audience and try and maybe do something that they want to see or hear? No. Again, as I said, we're a service organization. Yes. And I'm watching my time. I'm okay for time. I'm okay for time. Okay. Well, I know people, it's like, they got to get to iron. Do we have freedom in how we design, how we decide? Yeah, I mean, we definitely, we all sit down together, all the designers, and we discuss it a great deal. And we do all these books of research. Some of, like what I shared with you, we show people, we bring research, the costume designer, the set designer, sometimes the choreographer. It's a gestation process, which pragmatically, the creative part is often a couple of months. But then the set designer builds a model, usually a half-inch model, sort of half-inch to a foot or a centimeter to a meter. And you then look at that and see if it's feasible, and it sort of answers to his question, because you then show it to the opera company, generally, and they say, oh my God, that's too expensive, go back and rethink it. So there's a give and a take and an artistic flow in all of it. It all kind of evolves together.
How big is your research staff?
How big is my research staff? Let me see. I do have one person who's a dramaturg. So I'm sure you know, maybe you've heard that word. Dramaturg is a person who does help you with research and is often a sounding board for your ideas. So I have one person who I use, but I like to do all my own research because then I feel it more, and I process it better, and I like to, see things in different places and travel to see things, and and then of course all the designers always bring their own research as well. So, but I do work with a dramaturg who helps. And then, for the many of the productions that I did here, I worked with Kip Cranmer, who was the company's dramaturg, who was wonderful at that. It's important to have somebody who can say to you, that's not really a good idea, and who you trust, and not be afraid to hear that. That stuff is something that you learn as you get older, that you can just, somebody can say, that's really a crummy idea. Yeah.
Can you give us a tantalizing preview of Carmen, like maybe what makes it different from traditional production?
Well, this one is kind of, so this production I have done before. It's been around a bit. It started at the Royal Opera House, and then it has been seen in other places. And of course, we did it here like right after the pandemic, so it was a mess. So I think we've cleaned it up now from here. I mean, this Carmen was very much about, you will see the set is several very large, beautiful walls that are very inspired by the walls and the sculpture of Richard Serra. And so it uses color and light ways that it's not projected, but lit. Whereas the costumes are very conventional in a sense. They're very Spanish, Seville. When I first did this, I wanted to do an abstract set with realistic costumes. And that was sort of what I wanted, because Carmen is totally about the people. And this is a killer cast, by the way. Fabulous cast. Great cast. And I also wanted to do things like have a horse in it. And so there's a horse. Because I feel like, again, remember when I said, always think about the first time you saw these pieces. And the first time you saw Hermann or Bohème, it was a revelation. Or maybe it wasn't for you, maybe WhatsApp was a revelation. I don't know. But it's not usually the entry point for most people. So for me, I wanted to do a Carmen. The first time I did it was with Jonas Kaufmann and Ekaterina Tannhäuser, who were both emerging artists at that point. And I just wanted to have great relationships on stage and give them a surrounding world that was abstract enough that it could take us to the different locations, but realistic enough clothes. Clothing, it's funny, costumes for singers in a way is much more important than the set. They often don't care about it. They're like, hey, I get it. But they really want to know about their costumes from the second you start rehearsing. They want to wear pieces of it. They want to wear the shoes. They want to wear the coat. They want to wear the skirt, which is very, very helpful. And that's very important for performers. Yeah.
What you said earlier about people being sick, it was Stuttgart. and it was Hindemith's Sancta Susanna, which, if you read the reviews, you know why people got sick. But they were warned in advance. They were warned.
Stuttgart has a lot of money. They could work that out. You had a question? The timeline from when you got the first meeting to, it's about 2 years usually. It's about 2 years from when you first meet until it gets on stage. So this is premiering this spring and then it goes to others. So about 2 years ago. You know, after the pandemic, everybody sort of was grappling to come back to work and start things. But honestly, something like the ring cycle, that is much longer. Much longer. That, you know, that was something that I did in pieces over time, but most productions you plan about 2 years in advance. And you know, it's not like you're only doing that. Of course, you're planning it, but you're directing other things or running a company or you know, you're not just doing that. But that's good because it gives you time to think about it. It gives you time. It's like you know, using the slow cooker. You know, just doing my cooking metaphors tonight. I do think it's important. And it's funny, and I'm sure people have experienced this. Sometimes your first idea is the best idea, but you have to go through 50 other ideas and come back to the first idea. But you have to know what they all are. So I think I'm probably going to be wrapping this up like in another question or two. Yes.
What was your first opera that really wowed you?
The first opera that really wowed me. I was pretty young. My father took me to see Madame Butterfly. And I had no idea what I was seeing, but it was just the whole experience. I was probably about 10, I think. And it was just the whole experience was loud and overwhelming and colorful and the sound. And it wasn't like I said, oh, I'm going to be an opera director. But no, I sort of gradually eased into it through the theater, and then I loved opera. I grew up, I was fortunate, I grew up in Europe and had learned a lot of languages early on, and so I had a connection. And then, like I said, I was very fortunate. This was one of my first jobs working here at San Francisco Opera. I was an assistant to the assistant, and had a lot of great experience here. And met Jean-Pierre Pinel, who took me to Europe, and I worked there for a long time before I started directing on my own. So, but Madame Butterfly, but then also, you know, you have a lot of very seminal experiences of certain performances. I'm sure you have performances you remember all the time that become your benchmark for things, and it's hard to recapture that. So hopefully this Tannhäuser will be like that. So listen, everybody, it's a pleasure to be with you all, friends in San Francisco. Thank you for having me back. And please, I'll see you in Carmen, but please think about coming to Houston. And it's always great to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you for
I just wanted to do some shameless commercialism here. We are a society of people who love music, not just Wagner. And we would love to have you as a member of our society. So we have people here, our board members, raise your hands. They'll be more than happy to sign you up as a member of the society. Coming up, we have our annual holiday party, which is in December. And then in January, we're going to have a local professor and conductor, Leo Ayler, who's going to come and talk. And his talk is going to be everything you wanted to know about thematic transformations, aka leitmotifs, which are a big part of Wagner, but we're afraid to ask. And he's going to go over all of the medieval leitmotifs, and he'll have handouts and CDs for everybody who attends. So that's January on the 16th. February, the date to be determined. I haven't gotten, I'm dealing with a postdoc candidate who has, this project is creating a film called Soft Valkyrie, where he takes all of the leitmotifs from the Valkyrie, and he created video images of it, and made actually it's kind of charming, a little film that he's going going to show, and that'll be live. We don't have the date yet on that one. And then March 1st, we'll be having a Zoom meeting, which is called The Lover's Bane, which is going to be given by a longtime collaborator of the Wagner Society, Desiree Mays, and she's going to talk about the origin story of the Wagner opera Tristan and Isolde. This is Tristan und Isolde, and the medieval origin story. She's going to do the narration, and then we will have medieval minstrels and string players who are going to accompany that. And so that's being also co-sponsored by the San Francisco Early Music Society, so that's going to be on Zoom. So those are kinds of things that we do. We don't just sit and talk about Wagner all day long. Wagner was influenced by a number of musicians and artists, and he continues to influence musicians and artists the world over, and theatrical people, our guests today. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. We have some cookies here if you want to stay and visit with one another. If you want to join up, our Wagner Society members will give you the proper